Hi, I'm Leah Crane. I'm a reporter at New Scientist magazine, and I'm here with Avi Loeb, the chair of the astronomy department at Harvard, and we are here to talk about aliens. Thanks for joining me, Avi.
Thanks for having me.
So, your book on the first interstellar asteroid, Oumuamua, has just come out, and the title, Extraterrestrial, the First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth, implies that you think this asteroid may be a relic of ancient, intelligent alien life. Why do you think that?
Well, this object did not look like the rocks we have seen before in the solar system. It didn't look like a comet, since it didn't have a cometary tail of gas or dust. And it didn't appear to be an asteroid, a rock that does not have ice on it, because it was pushed away from the sun, most likely by reflecting sunlight. And actually, a few months ago, in September 2020, another object was discovered that exhibited an extra push away from the sun by reflecting sunlight with no cometary tail. And then it was realized that this is a rocket booster launched into space in 1966. And we know that we produced that object, and it's hollow and has very thin walls, and that's why it's pushed by reflecting sunlight. It has a large area for its weight. So if Oumuamua is similar in a way, the question is who produced it?
Can we go look at Oumuamua now to try and figure out what it is?
Unfortunately, not, because, well, it's moving faster than any rocket we can launch. But more importantly, it's now a million times fainter than it was when it passed near the sun. However, when I go to the kitchen and I see an ant, I get alarmed because it means that there must be many more ants out there. And so we looked at the sky for just a few years with the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii, and we found this object. That means that with the same telescope, we should find another one within a few years. There is no reason why that period of time was privileged. And actually, in less than 3 years, there would be a new observatory called the Vera Rubin Observatory that would be much more sensitive than Pan-STARRS and could find an object like that every month. And so the idea is, if we do find another object on its approach to us, we could send a camera that would take a close-up photo. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book.
So, do you think that we have already seen signs of intelligent life that we just haven't understood, given that we sort of got this glimpse at this object and then it hurtled away?
Yeah, in a way, uh, we responded, or the community responded to it similarly to a caveman that is used to playing with rocks, and when presented with a cell phone, would say the cell phone is a shiny rock. I mean, it's a natural tendency to assume that what we see is always what we have seen before. But when you go on the beach and you mostly see natural rocks, every now and then you see a plastic bottle, and that indicates a civilization may be around. And it's quite possible that by doing space archaeology, we would find many artificial objects out there, because we sent out Voyager 1, Voyager 2, New Horizons, and other probes. And potentially there were civilizations billions of years ago that did the same. The sun is a relative latecomer. Most stars formed billions of years before the sun. And so it's quite likely that space is full of equipment floating around. And we focused in the past on listening to radio signals, but that is just like a phone call. You need the counterpart to be alive at the time that you are having the conversation. We cannot have a conversation with the Mayan culture. It's not around anymore, but we can find about their lives from the relics they left behind through archaeological digs. And so archaeology offers us a glimpse at what existed in the past. And it's a mainstream activity that we have in the scientific community right now on Earth. I suggest having it a mainstream activity also in the context of space.
Cool. Your ideas about Oumuamua have faced pretty significant backlash, and some have said that it's irresponsible to speculate about this kind of thing when we don't have enough evidence, or really almost any evidence, to say that it's aliens. Are you concerned about the potential consequences of this kind of speculation for public trust in science?
Well, I wouldn't call it speculation because I try to follow the evidence, and this object had anomalies that I describe in my book, about six of them, that made it very different than anything we have seen before. So we should put all possibilities on the table, and I put the artificial origin on the table. There were, over the past couple of years, there were several other suggestions, three of them, and they all have flaws. For example, one suggestion was that it's a hydrogen iceberg. And so when hydrogen evaporates and generates a cometary tail, you wouldn't see it because hydrogen is invisible. And the problem with that proposal is that a hydrogen iceberg would not survive the trip through interstellar space. We show that in a scientific paper that we published. And another proposal was that it's a dust bunny, a very porous object, sort of like a cloud of dust that is 100 times less dense than air, floating in space and being pushed by reflecting sunlight. The problem with that is that it will get very hot as it comes close to the sun, like Oumuamua was. It will get heated to hundreds by hundreds of degrees. And such a cloud, very fluffy cloud, would not have the material strength to survive that passage near the sun. And there was another suggestion that maybe it's a shrapnel, a piece of a bigger object that passed close to a star and was disrupted by the tidal force of the star. If that were the case, the object would be elongated, cigar-shaped. But in fact, at a 90% confidence level, the reflected light from this object implied that it's pancake-shaped, it's flat, and so it cannot be associated with such an event. So all of the possibilities that were put on the table do not look very appealing. Of course, it could be something that we haven't imagined, but so far, all of the alternatives to an artificial origin contemplate something that we have never seen before. And so my point is, if it's something that we have never seen before, we should definitely consider also the possibility of an artificial object, mainly because it has huge implications for our society. And just ignoring that possibility is irresponsible, I would argue. People say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. My reply to that is extraordinary conservatism leads to extraordinary ignorance. If we are not willing to contemplate something new, we will never discover it. There was a seminar at Harvard about Oumuamua, and when I left the room, one of my colleagues that worked for decades on rocks within the solar system said, Oumuamua is so weird, I wish it never existed. And I was appalled by this because when nature gives you some evidence that doesn't line up with what you expected, that's actually an opportunity to learn something new. Science is supposed to be exciting, not boring. You shouldn't complain about the fact that something doesn't line up with what you expected.
So, relevant to that story, you've had a somewhat adversarial relationship with some other researchers involved in the search for extraterrestrial life. And some other scientists say you aren't giving enough credit to the history of the search for extraterrestrial life and the growing field around you that's continuing to search. Are you giving enough credit to others in the field?
Oh, sure. I have great respect for the work that was done in the past. My only point is that this should be an activity that is in the mainstream of astronomy. So, in fact, I argue for 1,000 times more funding to the search than was given in the past. And I actually advocate that what was done in the past should be not at the fringes of astronomy, but rather at the center of astronomy. Because look, for example, about the search for dark matter. We don't know what most of the matter in the universe is, and there are some ideas about that, one particle or another. And we invested hundreds of millions of dollars searching for specific types of particles, and that's considered part of the mainstream activity, even though it was not successful. Uh, we are searching in the dark, so to speak, for the dark matter. But also, it has no implication for our private life. If the dark matter is an axion versus a weakly interacting massive particles, that would have zero impact on our daily lives. However, if there are technological signatures out there and we are not the smartest kid on the block, that would have a huge impact on society. But yet, the search for those is underfunded by a factor of 1,000. So I actually not only appreciate what was done in the past and have great respect for people that worked on it, I actually want those people to be supported by at least a factor of 1,000 more, because I think it should be center stage in astronomy. And right now, the astronomy community is pushing it to the fringes. And that's just inappropriate given that the public is so interested in this subject and the public funds science. So scientists should reflect the public's interest.
So, why do you think that there is this sort of conflict with your colleagues um, about your work?
Well, I think part of it has to do with most people that are not familiar with the anomalies of Oumuamua. They prefer to stay in their comfort zone and not get into a controversial debate about a hypothesis of this type. There is also the association with reports on unidentified flying objects or on science fiction, the literature on science fiction that is not necessarily following the scientific laws that we know. And my answer to that is that, in ancient history, there were arguments that the human body has a soul, and therefore anatomy should not be pursued. The human body should not be dissected. And imagine if scientists would say, oh, there is a lot of controversy about the human body, and some statements do not make any sense, and therefore we should not get engaged in anatomy. If that were the case, where would modern medicine be? I think that science has an obligation to address questions that are of great interest to the public and provide clarity if we have the tools to do that. So, in the context of searching for technological signatures, we have the telescopes, we have the instruments. I think it's just a psychological block that traditionally prevented us from going into this arena, and that should be changed. And that's the purpose of my book.
You mentioned that you think that this should be center stage in astronomy. What do you think we need to do in order to grow this field and grow the diversity of ideas in this field?
Yes, so I can judge by the history of astronomy, and there were other fields that were ridiculed early on and then became center stage. I can give you two examples from my personal experience. One is gravitational wave astrophysics that received the Nobel Prize just a few years ago in physics. And I gave a lecture at the winter school in 2013, January 2013, in which I described gravitational wave astrophysics to the students in the audience as a very exciting future frontier. And 10 minutes into my talk, another lecturer stood up and said to me, and by the way, that lecturer was 20 years younger than I am, so it has nothing to do with age. That lecturer said, why are you wasting the time of these students on a subject that will never be important during their career? And just a couple of years later, the LIGO experiment discovered gravitational waves. And now it's one of the most exciting frontiers in astrophysics. So this is one example. Another one is that in 1952, Otto Struve, an astronomer, wrote a paper saying that if a Jupiter-like planet happens to be close to a star, like the sun, then it will tug the star back and forth. And we could detect that motion of the star. Or if it passes in front of the star, we could see the diminution of light from the star. And astronomers just didn't take it seriously, and time allocation committees on telescopes did not give time for such a search of a Jupiter close to a star, because the argument was, we know the solar system, we know why Jupiter is so far from the sun, and we shouldn't expect Jupiter to be close to a star, and therefore it's a waste of time to search for that. But then in 1995, more than 40 years later, such a system was discovered, and the Nobel Prize was awarded to it in 2019. And so you might say, oh, maybe it's not so bad, because even though there was a delay of 4 decades, eventually science got to explore this possibility. My point is, this is a baby that was barely born. I mean, first of all, we lost 4 decades in the process. We could have accomplished much more in searching for exoplanets in that time. But moreover, there are many babies that were not born at all, and they were suppressed. These are ideas that never came to fruition. And so something is wrong about the scientific culture dismissing out of the box ideas that could allow it to blossom. In the commercial sector, you see much more openness to such innovation. And I find it surprising that in academia, the willingness to take risks, the willingness to put skin in the game and potentially be wrong is very low. And, kids explore the world. They learn about the world by putting skin in the game, literally speaking. That's why they get bruised all the time. And I very much hope that scientists will be willing to do that as well.
What do you think needs to happen in order to find evidence of alien life that is convincing not just to you, but to everyone else as well?
Oh, it's very simple. We just need to take a picture of an object that shows that it's artificial and not a rock. So we just need to see something that doesn't look like a rock. And the problem with Oumuamua is that given its size, roughly the size of a football field, and its distance from Earth when it was discovered, the telescopes that we have could not resolve it. So you really need to fly a camera close up to such an object and take a close-up photograph of it. That would be conclusive, and that would convince everyone. But if we think that we know the truth in advance, if we argue it's never aliens, it's always rocks, then we will never take that picture.
What do you think the reaction will be like if and when someone does find incontrovertible evidence of alien life?
Well, I had a lot of interviews in the Spanish language about my book, and in many of them, the question was raised as to whether it would be good or bad for us to know that we are not the smartest kid on the block, or that there are aliens out there with technological capabilities. Because the idea was that maybe it will create turmoil in society, that notion, because it will affect religious beliefs and other, political stability and other issues. And my point is that scientific knowledge is always good. You can use your values to decide what to do with it. Just like in the case of nuclear energy, when it was discovered, there were two possibilities: either to use it for peaceful purposes as an energy source to supply the needs of society, or to use it for building nuclear weapons. And obviously that depends on your guiding principles. But knowing about our environment, knowing who else lives on our cosmic street, is important information for our long-term survival, for giving us the appropriate perspective about our place in the universe.
Do you believe that there is alien intelligence out there? Usually, when we speak about alien life, a lot of the time we're talking about microbes, not people or anything resembling people. Do you think it's out there, and do you think it's out there in a way that is discoverable by us?
Definitely, we now know that not only we are not at the center of the universe, as advocated by Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, That was flattering to our ego, and for 1,000 years people believed him until Copernicus and Galileo realized that most likely the Earth moves around the sun. But not only that we are not at the center, we also our backyard is quite typical. Turns out that about half of all the sun-like stars have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. And so my point is simple. If you arrange for similar circumstances on a planet like the Earth, then you might as well get similar outcomes. So if I had to guess, I would argue that we are as common as ants are on a sidewalk. There were lots of things like us in the past. They may not be around anymore. If they destroyed their planet or did something bad, they might not be around. So many of them are dead by now, but we can still search for their relics in the form of industrial pollution or objects like Oumuamua that would appear technological when we take a photograph of them. Um, and we can search for artificial lights on the dark side of planets. We could search for big structures surrounding planets or near them, surrounding the star. So there are many ways by which we can find evidence for technological civilizations, most of which are probably not around anymore. And the importance of that is, first of all, we could import the most advanced technologies to Earth and save us the time in developing them. But even more important is a lesson of history. If we realize why they're not around, we can avoid a similar fate.
Great. And I think that that is a good place to stop. So thank you so much, Avi. This was really fascinating.
Thank you for having me. I should just add a small comment that it's quite possible, that they have never visited us or are not particularly interested in us because of social distancing at a cosmic scale. If they close themselves in a cocoon and never show any interest in interacting with anyone, you might think that we will never find about them anything, but that's not necessarily true because they always have to throw some trash, and we can act as investigative journalists do that go through the trash cans of celebrities in Hollywood in order to find some evidence for their private lives.
So even if they're not ready to be found, we could still go out and look for them anyway.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone else for watching.